Okay, who knows what a trader is? What's the difference between a trader and a retailer? Ian? First of all, we'll talk about some definitions. There are differences between a retailer and a trader, and it's caused by looking at the industry from different directions in the Electricity Act and also in the Electricity Industry Participant Code. So a trader is a term that actually exists within the code itself, and it means a person who buys or sells from the clearing manager. So when you look through Part 11 of the code, which is what regulates registry activity, we use the word trader, because a trader is that party that buys and sells from the clearing manager, and it's that party that actually has to populate the registry itself. Conversely, a retailer is a person who actually sells electricity to a consumer. So a trader may sell electricity to a consumer, in which case they would be a trader and a retailer, or they may buy electricity from the clearing manager for their own purchase, in which case we call them a purchaser, so they're a trader, but they're also a purchaser. Or they may buy electricity to sell to another person who acts as the retailer and sells to the customer. So it's like having networks. We had different layers of networks. Believe it or not, we actually have different layers of retailers as well, and we'll step through those actually in a few minutes. But just to bear in mind that when we deal with the registry, the party that interfaces with the registry is the person who is on the registry that has their participant identifier on there as the trader. They may or may not actually be the retailer. So, what do retailers do? Well, they carry out a multitude of tasks. In most cases, they are the participant with a customer contract. So they're a participant that has an agreement to supply electricity to a customer. They may have an agreement with the network owner that they will actually invoice that customer also for network charges. They'll manage credit issues, they'll manage connection issues, they'll manage energisation, de-energisation issues as well. They will acquire customers, so they'll actually participate in the customer switching process, and in a lot of cases they'll actually manage the outage notification. So they have quite a wide range of things that they actually do. But there are the three different types of retailers, and I thought maybe we should just step through them, because it's not very well understood in the industry what the three layers of retailers actually are. So, first one, retailers that buy electricity from the clearing manager and sell to a customer are a trader. They're also a retailer. Retailers that buy electricity from a purchaser who buys electricity from the clearing manager is a totally different type of retailer, and currently that retailer has very limited code obligations. They're still required to register with the authority actually as a participant. They're required to comply with other legislation such as low fixed charge regulations, and they may have some obligations coming up as part of the retailer default process that we're implementing at the moment as well. Then we have retailers that just sit on the island of networks that we were talking about before, that are not directly or indirectly connected to the grid. That is another type of retailer, not regulated actually within the code. However, they are still a retailer, and they are still required to actually register with the authority as a retailer participant. So we use the term reconciliation participant, and when you look through the code, there's a whole lot of terms that as you go through, they spread out and spread out and spread out. And in the code, we'll use the term reconciliation participant. And reconciliation participant, I've just shown here, basically means it's a trader, it's the grid owner for GXP metering, it's the owner of a network interconnection point, and it's a purchaser that buys from the clearing manager. So whenever you read through the code, and if you're acting as a retailer that's buying from the clearing manager and selling to a customer, anywhere where it says trader, those obligations actually apply to you. Anywhere where it says reconciliation participant, those obligations actually apply as well. One of the things that we do is we require reconciliation participants to be certified. And that means that every year they're required to actually have an audit. And the reason for the audit is to make sure that their processes and procedures comply with the requirements of the code. And like we were saying before, the market is exceedingly big and complex. You can't see individual errors actually occurring. We rely on processes and procedures to actually deliver the right outcome, and it's those processes and procedures that get audited. And a reconciliation participant needs to provide us at the moment with an audit every year, and we have 2 people actually review that audit independently, and they will talk to the participant directly where there are code issues actually involved. Very few participants ever have a nice clean audit report. The code is so big, so complex, that a lot of times we go back and we talk to participants to explain what the code actually means and what their obligation actually is. So there's a whole raft of obligations that actually apply. Part of the audit procedure is the requirements to actually manage and update the registry appropriately. So, traders. So they're the one that we're going to talk about. What do? Well, they switch ICP identifiers. If they have an arrangement with a customer, they must actually switch that ICP identifier to themselves. The code commences their obligation from the time they actually get that arrangement. Under the Act, from the time that arrangement starts, they're actually acting as a retailer, and they are required then to comply with the code. The code sets out 4 different switch methodologies for traders. So we mentioned there were 3 different types of switches. Traders are one of those types, but they have another 4 switch methodologies that actually sit underneath them. The first is a new ICP goes to ready. The trader picks it up for the first time. We actually call it the initial assignment, and there's a specific process in the code that the trader must actually follow. There's a specific format actually for it that I haven't noted down, but I can find it for those people who are actually interested in it. There is then what we call the standard switch process, and the standard switch process is about clauses. It would be 1 to 6 of Schedule 11.3, and that deals actually with small installations that actually switch between customers. And there are specific differences in the switching methodology between small customers and large customers that we'll talk about in a few minutes as well. They can have a move-in switch process, which means that a standard switch is where you have a customer, and it might be that Ian decides he's going to actually switch retailers. He stays at his house, he switches from Meridian to Genesis. That is a standard switch, because Ian actually hasn't moved location. Although he's moved retailer, he hasn't actually moved location. That's a standard switch. A move-in switch is where Ian goes and buys a new premise and he actually moves in. He doesn't want to trade with the retailer there that owns the ICP identifier on the registry, but he wants to go with a different retailer. So at the time he moves into the new premise, he acquires a new retailer. That switch process is called a move-in switch, because the customer is new to that premise and switches retailer, so he's moving in. We simply called it a move-in switch. The other type, the 4th type, is what we call the half-hour switch process. Now, we have a code amendment that's just waiting for the legal pieces to actually finish on it. We're not going to call it the half-hour switch process. We're going to call it the gaining trader completes process or something like that that actually describes it a little bit better. But for larger sites, they follow a different process. And when you work through the switch processes that you actually have, there are 3 identifiers that are actually used within the switch file. One is TR, which means a standard switch process. One is MI, which means it's a move-in switch process. The other is HH, which means it's this big switch process. Now, historically, traders have actually used the HH process for larger sites, and they've carried them out manually. The smaller ones, the standard and the move-in switch, are actually often just totally automated. As long as there's no exceptions, the switches occur without any intervention. To further complicate matters, the code actually allows switches to be undone. So even though you've actually switched a customer, you can actually withdraw the switch for anything up to 2 months after the switch event. Now, the reason for allowing that in the code is actually very historic. If we go right back in time, once upon a time, the information in the registry was not very good. Retailers habitually seemed to switch the wrong ICPs, and it was necessary to withdraw them. Now the withdrawal process is still actually sitting there. Typically it might be used where husbands like me don't have authorisation to switch retailers, and I go and actually initiate a switch and it has to be undone. It still sits there. It is regularly exercised. Around about 15% of switches that are initially made are subsequently withdrawn. Some of them because the losing trader will make a good offer to the customer. Sometimes it might be that the customer's been switched in error. Sometimes it might be that the customer has actually requested that the switch actually be undone. And there's a set of standard reasons that we publish for which switches can actually be withdrawn. Now, part of the annual audit process should actually check that traders actually use the appropriate reason codes, and they have the appropriate reason for actually using those particular codes as well. Now, to demarcate switches, and it's like going out in your car. Imagine your car speedometer. You've got 2 simple registers there. One's a trip meter that tells you, you reset it, and it tells you how many kilometres you've actually done since you last reset it. That's what we call an absolute read. It tells you an absolute value. You've got a value there, you can go away and do something actually with it. In the registry, when we burrow down in the MEP information and we're talking about meter register information, some of the codes we use will be talking about absolute values. And that's exactly what it's saying. It's saying that a meter register records an actual value and then resets. Records another value, then resets. The other type of register that you can get is an accumulating register, and this is like your old odometer that keeps scrolling round and round and round. To get a volume, you need a start read and an end read, and you subtract the 2 and you've got a volume. Now, we call that an accumulating register read. Most standard switches and most move-in switches actually use that odometer type read, and they require a start read and an end read. So one of the things that the switching process actually does is it says if you're using the standard switch process or a move-in switch process, the retailer who completes the switch must provide a meter read for every meter register. And when you look through the formats and when you go through the switch process you'll be doing with Jeff, that's one of the things that's actually going to come up, that you'll be required to actually put a meter read actually into the switch process. If there are only absolute meter registers on the site, you don't actually have to put any accumulating registers in. It's only where there is an accumulating register that you need a value to be placed into it. The other thing that retailers also do is determine who will be the metering equipment provider for an ICP. So it's the retailer who actually decides who will provide the metering for an ICP. So retailers can, at will, for any particular reason, actually put a new metering equipment provider in actually on an ICP. It's entirely their choice if they wish to switch MEPs. And when they update the registry with a new MEP identifier in their registry maintenance file, they trigger a switching process that could result in the MEP for an ICP actually changing. So, we said about switching. I've put the names of switch files here because we have legacy names that we actually apply to switch files. We have an NT, we have an AN, a CS, an NW, an AW, an RR, and an AC. So I've said here what each one actually means. Now, the average switch in New Zealand may take about 4 to 5 switch files. Thank your lucky stars you're not actually in Australia, because it's about 42 switch files actually to complete a switch. So here we have a very simplified process. But essentially, if a gaining trader wants to acquire an ICP, they issue what we call an NT file to the registry, and that's exactly what initiates the switch. So over here, we say for a standard and switch move process or a half-hour switch process, that the gaining retailer or trader actually initiates the process by putting an NT file into the registry. The losing retailer is then required to respond, and they could respond one of 3 ways. They could issue an acceptance notice, and they could say, okay, well, we've got the NT, yeah, we're going to progress it in the next few days, which lets the gaining trader actually know that the switch is proceeding. They may decide to issue a CS file, which means completion of switch, which means the switch completes immediately. Or they may decide to actually offer to withdraw the switch, and they put in what we call notification of switch withdrawal, which is an NW file. Now, switch withdrawals require a response, and just because one retailer wants to withdraw a switch doesn't mean that the switch can be withdrawn. A switch can only be withdrawn if both the losing and a gaining trader in a switch agree. If one of them disagrees, the switch must actually still proceed. Once the switch has actually proceeded, it may be that the meter read that's been put in the switch file is disputed. And there is actually a process for that, and we call that RR, or read request change. It just means that the gaining trader can actually say, I believe the switch read you actually gave to me was actually incorrect. I want it changed, please. And the code says that it sets out a disputes process that has to be followed, and it kicks in at 200 kilowatt hours per meter register and above. For 200 kilowatt hours per meter register and below, the disputes process actually doesn't apply. It's just the goodwill of the retailers then whether they wish to settle the dispute between themselves. And if the RR is actually issued, the other retailer must issue a acknowledgement file where they can either accept or reject the read change. Now, I've set these out here, and two processes out, standard and switch move process, half-hour process. The real difference between them is who actually issues the CS file, who actually completes the switch. So for the standard and switch move process, the losing trader completes the switch. For the half-hour process, or the gaining trader completes process, it's the gaining trader who actually completes the switch. So they're two very, very different processes in the way that you actually manage them. If you're switching a smaller site, you're dependent on the losing retailer actually fulfilling their code obligations for the switch to actually proceed. If you are switching a larger site, all that you would need to do as a gaining trader is give an NT file to the registry, give a CS file to the registry, and job's done. Everything's actually completed. The switch is actually carried out. So, two very different processes. The only one that we're covering actually within the course that Jeff is covering is these processes. Jeff, I don't think you're doing the half-hour one. No. That will be for another time. So, traders have heaps and heaps of other obligations within the code. And the code says that if you're a trader and you want to switch an ICP, you can't do it unless you have an arrangement with the distributor for the network that that ICP is actually connected to. So you're required to have an arrangement in place. You're required to have an arrangement in place with the meter owner as well. So if you're going to retain the meter owner, you must actually have that arrangement in place before you actually issue the NT file. You've got to populate and maintain registry information, and there's a whole lot of information actually set out within the code that must be populated and maintained by retailers. And when you were looking through the registry screens before, you would have seen a lot of the retailer entries that had to be maintained. Like we were saying before, traders authorise the energisation, de-energisation of an ICP. They carry out the ICP switching. They purchase electricity from the clearing manager, or they may sell electricity to the clearing manager if that ICP is generating electricity. They've got to maintain prudential security, and again, they must comply with clause 11.2. So if a trader is aware that the information that they have on the registry is incorrect, they must go and fix it. If they're aware that the information that they may have given in a switch file, which might be the meter read that we're talking about before, is incorrect, they must actually go and contact the retailer and actually fix it. So there's a very strict code obligation around that. And we talked about accuracy of information before. The other thing that I just wanted to mention is that for traders, you are receiving notifications from the registry as soon as a distributor changes their information, or as soon as an MEP changes their information. For traders, it's a really good idea to actually keep a watchful eye on that information. If you are manually switching just using the web browser, it's a good idea to go to your reg out boxes and watch for notifications, because it could be that a distributor's changed a price category code or a loss category code or a GXP that may actually directly impact your invoicing to the customer, because the market settlements are actually going to take it automatically into account. Or it might be that the MEP's decided to replace the meter and he's forgotten to tell you about it, and he's also forgotten to give you end reads and start reads for the meter that's actually gone in, which could actually lead to quite a bit of problems as well. So that's one of the things Jeff will be talking to you about manually reviewing that registry outbox for any notifications that do come through. So, any questions about traders? Great, thank you.